In the 2000s, Total Nonstop Action, or TNA, was the biggest rival company to the WWE. Total Nonstop Action Wrestling offered something different to the product the World Wrestling Entertainment was offering at the time. Now, some of the biggest professional wrestlers in the world got their start in TNA. AJ Styles, Samoa Joe, just some examples. Even Sting, while not being a homegrown talent, was one of the biggest TNA stars. Now, I don't want to sit here and tell you the entire history of the Nashville-based promotion, because then we'd be here all day.
Today we're looking at Total Nonstop Action's one and only video game. Now, it's interesting to see that this game was actually developed by Midway Games, specifically the Los Angeles branch. So, let's see if this game holds up or if it was never good at all.
Now, the first hints of a TNA video game would be back in 2005, reported by Jay Cochran for the website Toy News International in November of 2005. Originally, it was reported that this would lead to a multi-year agreement with TNA to publish video games, and it was also reported that the first game would be released back in 2007. Now, almost nothing that was shown in the original image would be in the game, however. By the time it did release in September of 2008, both Jeff Hardy and Monty Brown had left TNA, and AJ Styles had a completely different look. Watching the behind-the-scenes videos, you can tell that the developers really did care about what they were making. One thing that I found that was personally cool was that the TNA wrestlers themselves would motion capture their own moves and mannerisms. This is cool because at the time, I believe WWE still had handcrafted animations for the SmackDown vs. Raw series, so I could be wrong about this, but this could be one of the first wrestling games to have motion capture. Now, getting into the game itself, you are greeted by a hyped up intro talking about TNA itself. And what's crazy is that AEW Fight Forever pretty much did copy the opening sequence to TNA Impact's intro.
There are moments when time stands still. When history unfolds, when we are bound by the magnificence of one singular event.
There are moments when time stands still. When history unfolds. When we are bound by the magnificence of one singular event.
Now, visually, I was actually shocked at how good this game still looks. Now, don't get me wrong, it definitely does have that PS3 era jank to it, but I think the wrestlers in the arenas look really detailed.
Now, quickly, I'd like to briefly touch on the controls for this game, because they are pretty unique and odd for a professional wrestling game, in my opinion. See, your strikes are simple enough, just simply press square or X. But then you get into the grapples. L1 and triangle grapples, and then triangle does the subsequent move. Now, while I think that's pretty odd for a wrestling game, I do actually think it does somewhat make it unique for this title. R1 is your reversals, and what's really cool about the reversals in this game is that you can actually reverse the reversals, but the timing's pretty strict, so you're not going to get it every time.
On the presentation front, the game does do a fine job. Now, I do hate that sadly we only have short entrances. I would have much rather have seen the full ones like the WWE games have. Don West and Mike Tenay do provide the color commentary here, and considering that these two are one of my favorite commentator groups of all time, it does make me feel like this could be a real match seen on TNA television. While not perfect commentary, I don't think it's abhorrently terrible. When connecting with the finishers, there are these dope cinematic camera cuts that show off the finisher. Now, they don't appear in multi-man matches, which is a downside, but the presentation in this game is really good. A complaint that I have is that this game does lack in some match types. You would think with it being a TNA game, we would see matches like the Six Sides of Steel or King of the Mountain, but the only TNA original match here is the Ultimate X match. Now, while Ultimate X is fun, I do wish we had gotten more match types that were seen on TNA television. Speaking of match types, I did play a triple threat between AJ Styles, Joe, and Daniels, and it's probably the most fun match I've had ever playing this game. Granted, it is the greatest triple threat match in TNA history, in fact professional wrestling history in my opinion, but just wanted to mention this. Now, this game does include a story mode, and frankly it's a very interesting one. It follows a guy named Suicide, who they would actually turn into a real character on television to promote the game. Suicide here is voiced by Loki, or Senshi as he was called at the time, which is a fact that I would never have guessed if the man didn't come out and say it himself. To keep it simple stupid, Suicide wins the world title and gets the shit kicked out of him and dumped in Mexico. This leads to the Creation Suite, and it is not good, people. It's very basic and limited, sadly. Now, so far in this review, I have made it a point to try and not compare this game to the WWE games at the time, but I wish this creation suite was a lot like the way WWE handled theirs. Anyway, you make your character and are dumped in a gauntlet in Mexico. Now, one cool reference I noticed is that there's a character you fight called Nightwolf. That has to be a Mortal Kombat reference, which if it is, that's really cool. Now, after defeating 3 challengers, you get sent to an armory ran by these 2 ICP knockoffs. You beat them, and then the game gives you the first real challenge in the form of the first real wrestler, Cowboy James Storm. Beating him gets you a tryout in TNA. Now, after defeating all these random jobbers, you get to take on the Black Machismo himself, Jay Lethal. And winning that, you are now officially a TNA superstar. Now, I don't want to spoil the entire plot because this is a review, not a retrospective. But I do want to talk about this game's random as hell difficulty spikes. See, later in the tag division, you have to fight the Motor City Machine Guns. But this is one of the hardest matches in the game. And, you know, I'm sure you're thinking, okay, this is definitely a skill issue, which it could very well be. But this is not, okay, here's a mild challenge. No, this is bullshit. I hate bullshit challenges. I can't stand them. Like, this fight was so hard to the point that I almost considered not finishing the story mode because of it. I cannot stand when a game just hands you a bullshit hard match. Anyway, after no joke an hour, I finally get to 1, 2, 3, and then after, I challenge LAX to the tag titles. This match was also hard, but not nearly as hard as the Motor City Machine Guns match. Later, the game makes a big deal about you having to take on Samoa Joe. But, as Scott Steiner once said, he's fat! So, we're able to defeat him easily. Once again, without spoiling the entire story mode like I was originally going to, it's pretty good actually. The narrative is pretty good, and if you can ignore some of the harder matches, it's actually a pretty solid story mode, and I actually recommend it. It's pretty good actually.
Now, TNA Impact isn't the best game of all time, but I actually enjoyed it a lot, mainly for the novelty of it being TNA's only video game. Now, there was a reported sequel that was in the works until Midway filed for bankruptcy, and I would have loved to see a sequel to this game because I think it's a solid foundation to improve on. Like, imagine having more match types like the King of the Mountain or the Six Sides of Steel, or more weapons like tables. What could have been, man?